So, Rabbi, you can use the mic. I think there's a problem with the streaming this morning. I just heard, so Susie's trying to fix it. But thank you. Rabbi Schuldenfrei, I think you all saw the message. He's out ill, he can't teach today. And Rabbi Mark graciously is going to teach an extra half hour this morning. So at least cover part of Rabbi Schuldenfrei's schedule. So we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep, so I'm sorry, but you're stuck with me for an extra half hour today. And I'll leave it up to you. So we're going to do what we've been normally doing for the first hour. If in the second half hour that you'd like to switch and do something else, I could do a short presentation for you on angels and demons, or we can just keep going with the, diaspora communities. And I don't need...
You always complain that you don't have enough time, so this gives you an extra half.
Sure, so we'll see. So it's up to you, but, if you decide you want to do something else for that extra half hour, you need a break from all of this, I'm happy to do something else. Yes, so we're going to finish up, Austria today, and we're going to do Angola. Now, I've also prepared Argentina, so like I said, if you want to keep going with all this stuff, I can do that in that third half hour as well. It's up to you. Okay, so we left off with Austria, and I'll just backtrack a year or two from where we left off. So remember, in 1938 is the annexation, the Anschluss. Hitler basically walks into Austria and takes it over. And of course, then we have Kristallnacht. And in 1939, basically the entire Jewish population of Austria is annihilated. By 1942, there's only maybe 2,000 to 5,000 Jews left anywhere in Austria. About over 65,000 were murdered, but many of the Austrian Jews got out before 1938, as we talked about last week, unlike the German Jews. All right. Starting in 1955, approximately 3,000 of those Jews who had been there before stayed to try to rebuild a Jewish community. And you'll recall that after the war, there were displaced person camps. And so there were approximately 250,000 to 300,000 displaced persons in Austria. Among them were a number of Jews, obviously. And so as I just said, about 3,000 stayed in Austria, the rest left. And included in these displaced persons was, as we know, Simon Wiesenthal, who had been interred in the Mauthausen concentration camp, which was located in Austria. Since the Holocaust, the Jewish communities in Austria have rebuilt somewhat. There are approximately 12,000 to 15,000 Jews living in Austria now, mostly in the three largest cities, Vienna, Graz, and Salzburg. As we... How do I want to say this? We know that many of the Jews who left they faced rising anti-Semitism even after the Holocaust. So there was a huge Austrian population of Jews. Now it's only 12 to 15,000. There was a even huger population of Polish Jews. And that's why most of the concentration camps were located in Poland. Because remember, Hitler, when they worked out the final solution, that wasn't Hitler's first plan. Hitler's first plan was to make life so difficult that Jews would leave. German Jews didn't leave. And so when the time came, and the Jews were stuck there, Hitler had to begin to change his ideas. He annexes Vienna, and all of a sudden there's a large Jewish population that he has brought into the Third Reich. And he's trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with these Jews? One of their first plans was to deport all the Jews to the island of Madagascar. It was called the Madagascar Plan. But it proved to be completely not a viable plan because at the time Britain ruled the seas. And so there was no way for the Germans to make that happen. And it isn't until Hitler invades Poland that everything that creates an enormous problem for Hitler in his mind, because now he has annexed territory with millions of Jews. And now he has to figure out, what am I going to do? I can't deport them. They haven't left. What do I do with them? And of course, then we know the plan and the horrific results of that plan. Okay. So there are 12 to 15,000 Jews in Austria, in the biggest cities. And even as late as 2008, you still had some neo-Nazis. Jörg Haider was the governor of one of the Viennese areas, and a devout anti-Semite. In 1998, we get the Art Restitution Act. So all of you have heard about Jewish families trying to get pieces of art that were confiscated by the Nazis during the war, and some have been successful. And there were letters of compensation written to 19,000 survivors to reimburse them for the trauma that they suffered during the Holocaust. The Austrian government paid about $2 million to those people. And the Austrian government also gave $40 million to the Austria Jewish Fund, which would help Jewish organizations within Austria. Today, there are synagogues, retirement homes, Jewish museum, all the way from the Reform movement to Haredi, movement, and of course Chabad is in Austria. But this was interesting as I was researching this. The biggest minorities of immigrants are from the former Russian Republic of Georgia and from the city of Bukhara, which is in Uzbekistan. By 2019, Austria approved a citizenship law for direct descendants of the Holocaust. Previously, Austrian citizenship had only been for victims and their children. Now, if you could prove that you were a direct descendant anyway, grandchildren, etc., you could have automatic citizenship to Austria. And then out of that program, in 2021, there were approximately 950 applications that were approved. So you know that Spain did something very similar in recent times as well. They said that if you could prove you were a descendant of the Sephardi Jews who had been kicked out of Spain, then you could apply for Spanish citizenship. And some Jews, yes, some Jews took it, what's the word? Some Jews took advantage of that, but from what I can tell, it wasn't a hugely successful program in the sense that lots of Sephardic Jews went back to Spain. Okay, so that's Austria. What I want to talk about now is Angola. Okay, that's roughly what Africa looks like. Roughly what Africa looks like. There's Angola on the west coast of Africa. Here's the capital city of Luanda. And there's another large city right in here, Donde. Okay. So, let's see. So, Angola has a Jewish population, a small Jewish population, that extends all the way back in the beginnings to medieval times. When I say a small population, there are approximately 300 Jewish families in Angola. And many of them live in the capital city of Luanda, and they are of mixed backgrounds, meaning some are Sephardic, some are Ashkenazic, and they come from all different countries, and we'll find out why in just a sec. So like many of the countries in Africa, Angola began its history as a Portuguese colony. In the 15th century, meaning in the 1400s, Portugal colonized Angola, and we have the first real settlement of Jews somewhere in the 16th century, in the 1500s. So following the Spanish Inquisition and during and following the Portuguese Inquisition. In 1951, Angola formally becomes a province of Portugal. And then in 1975, they have fought the Angolan Independence War. And by 1975, Angola gains its independence from Portugal. So that's the basic history. Now, the first settlers in Angola seem to have been Portuguese New Christians. Portuguese New Christians meaning the conversos. And we'll take 30 seconds to recall. So conversos were Jews who converted out of fear of being put to death. If you were a heretic in Spain at the time, and who were considered heretics? These were Christians who were not practicing Christianity in the way that the Pope had required it to be practiced. That's what made you a heretic. Now, Jews obviously were heretics. because we weren't practicing Christianity at all, obviously. So the method of killing heretics during the Spanish Inquisition was burning at the stake. It was a particularly horrible, gruesome, and painful death. And so many Jews were expelled, but some decided to stay, and they converted to Christianity. So we know that the Spanish Inquisition did not go after Jews. It didn't. The Jews were already heretics. They were expelled. Who did the Spanish Inquisition go after? Jews who had converted to Christianity, the conversos. Why? Because the question is, are they practicing Christianity the way the Pope wants it practiced? Or did they just say that they will practice Christianity, and at night in their cellars on Shabbat they light candles and everything? Interestingly enough, I'm sure you've all heard stories like this, and you may have some here at Adat Ariel for sure. 3 Fridays ago, a man came into my Friday night service, and he sat down, and he was very friendly, and he was excited and wanted to participate and whatever. And I found out during the service that he's from Puerto Rico. His family was Roman Catholic, but he found out on the deathbed of his grandmother revealed to him that they traced their lineage maternally to Isaac Luria in Israel, one of the preeminent Kabbalists in Israel. And he found that out, and he was very excited. He said, I want to be Jewish. I want to know what I want. So he has been coming to services, and everything he can learn, he wants to learn. He just had no idea that he was Jewish. And these families are everywhere. They're everywhere. Okay. So the first settlers in Angola were Portuguese New Christians. They were conversos. And we know that many of the conversos left Spain and Portugal. Where did they go? They went to various places, but probably the largest place they went was New Amsterdam, which at the time was considered the New Jerusalem.
You keep saying it conversos. Was there a formal quote ceremony that converted them? I mean, they didn't go to a mikvah like we would.
So how does one convert to Christianity? One takes classes, one accepts the sacraments, the Eucharist, right? You go up to, I mean, we all know about this. You go up and you take the wafer and the wine, and you declare that this is the body and the blood of Jesus, etc. And you agree to renounce your Jewish. Yeah. And baptism. Sure, baptism, right? Which is the equivalent of our mikvah. That's where they got it from, basically. Yes. Some Protestants do, yes. Some Protestants don't. So the ceremony itself is not as involved as ours. But the meaning of the ceremony is the same, basically. You affirm your beliefs in whatever this religion is. So when the convert in our tradition goes into the mikveh, they have several prayers they have to say, and the final one is Shema, right? And they have to attest that the God of Israel basically is their God. It's the same thing that Ruth does. right? When she comes, your people will be my people, I will lodge where you lodge, your God will be my God. That's what makes her a convert. She has accepted the Israelite God as her God, coming from a Moabite pagan tradition. And that's what qualifies her, shall we say, as a convert. And I was doing in my other class yesterday, I was doing some midrash on this senior stuff is like not happening at all. It's not making me happy at all. Let me move on from that. I'll come back if it comes to it. Yes.
Well, you say the first settlers, do you mean the first Jewish people, or, I mean, were there?
Yes, the first Jewish people. Yes. There were absolutely, there were indigenous folks there, of course, yes. But as the Portuguese colonized it, I know, I'm just taking off my jacket. Okay. There we go. So,
Were they in any way involved in trading, the ones that went to Angola?
yes, absolutely. Absolutely, they were involved in trading. They were Portuguese Christians who were new Christians who were fleeing the Portuguese Inquisition in 1536. So you remember the Spanish Inquisition, 1492. Then the Portuguese monarchy brings it to Portugal a few years after that. So we have the Bartholomew Diaz, who was suspected of being a crypto-Jew, probably was, and he brought Jewish artisans into Luanda. In other words, he encouraged people to immigrate. And we have evidence of him bringing them there and having them participate, in services in secret with a rabbi. In secret, obviously, because Judaism wasn't accepted yet. Even though the Spanish Inquisition, the Portuguese Inquisition was not in Angola, it was a Portuguese colony. Right? So the idea of Jews living a free life there was not okay. We don't have evidence of Jews being persecuted in Angola because of the Inquisition in Portugal, which is the home country, but we do have evidence that the sentiments were still there. By the 18th century, we have a functioning community in Dando. And some prominent new Christians, Gaspar de Robles and Mariel Alvane Prieto, testified later on that when they were in Angola, they were subjected to Judaizing ideas. In other words, people were trying to bring them back into the fold by teaching them the laws of Moses. Yes.
Is it true that the Portuguese weren't so supportive of the Inquisition, that they did it out of, what's the word I want?
Duress.
Yeah, not duress, but that the king's daughter, I think, married a Spanish princess, and because of that Portuguese had to go along with Spain in terms of the Inquisition, but they weren't so gung-ho on it at the time. So I can see that maybe the colony wasn't as emphatic about doing the Inquisition there. Probably the Inquisition didn't go to Angola.
Exactly. Yes, you're right. You're 100% correct.
Oh, nobody can hear me.
Oh.
I mean, except
So the point, Rosa made the point that because the Portuguese monarchy intermarried with the Spanish monarchy, that it they felt obligated to import the Inquisition into Portugal. However, they did not seem to be as fanatic as Ferdinand and Isabella were in terms of enforcing it and in terms of enforcing it. Now, yes, Portuguese Jews left, for sure, and the Portuguese conversos left as well. Oh, I remember what I was going to say earlier. So many of these conversos fled to various places. They went to Amsterdam, which was called the New Jerusalem. The problem was that in Amsterdam, it had a religious community already, and now all of these conversos came to Amsterdam and wanted to begin to re-identify as Jews. The problem was that, in general, they knew very little about Judaism, because we're talking about children and grandchildren, right? And so they didn't know about Judaism. And the Jewish community that was already in Amsterdam was annoyed that they have to sit there and they have to teach all these people how to be Jewish. And it created a large problem for the Jewish Amsterdam community, and it created problems for any Jewish community into which conversos tried to integrate. And you can understand the difficulty here. You know, the people find out they're Jews, like this gentleman in my synagogue, and he's all excited, and he wants to participate, he wants to learn. And at the same time, everyone is, in one hand, is thinking, wow, this is great, come join us, we want to be welcoming, we want to do all these things. And then at the same time, it's like, oh, but they don't know anything. They don't know anything. Where do we even start? How do we even begin? Right? Which is why we have very good, the AJU has a great introduction to Judaism class. And they start from the beginning, and they take applicants for conversion 5-6 months. And they go over everything. And that's what it takes. I applaud all of you, because this information that we never get as children. We get fun Bible stories as children. And then our Jewish education stops, unless you make it a point to reach out and learn more, which is great, because I have found that most Jews know very little about Judaism, very little. And they know even less about what we believe as Jews. You know, if I'm asking a Jewish person, what do we believe as Jews? The most common answer is, God is one and it's not Jesus. Okay, that's a good start. Do we know anything else? No, because we don't teach it. Okay, so these two conversos had testified when they left Angola that there were attempts to teach them the laws of Moses while they were there. I assume the converso population there that was trying to reintegrate as Jews saw them as conversos. A lot of times you can identify conversos by their last names, and began to, I suppose, make little inroads and try to teach them a little bit about being Jewish, and then maybe they would understand what their heritage was and come along. In the 1900s, there were attempts to establish Jewish colonies in Angola, larger Jewish colonies. Most, if not all of them, ended up failing. Probably the most ambitious plan was It was called the Angola Plan, and they tried to push it through between 1907 and 1913, and it was the Jewish territorial organization in Britain. And they wanted to set up a large colony in West Africa, and they were especially looking at Angola. Yes?
Is this at all related to the Uganda proposition that came about at the time of Herzl?
I think it related only in the sense that attempts were made looking for other places. So yes, I would say related for sure. So many of you will recall when Theodor Herzl first proposed the idea of a homeland for Jews. One of the first big proposals, as Joette correctly points out, was Uganda. That Uganda would be the new homeland for Jews. At the time, Uganda was under British control, and so it was a British colony, so the British could make that idea. The problem was Herzl proposed it, and he thought, okay, this is going to be great. We're going to have a homeland, and it's going to be in Uganda, and that's wonderful, right? Well, the delegates to whom Herzl was speaking, other Jewish people looked at him and they said, what? What? Uganda? There's only one place that can be a Jewish homeland. Are you crazy? And so Herzl had to kind of, as we say, tuck his tail between his legs, and finally he ends up, endorsing a Jewish homeland where it should be. But Uganda was one of...
So did this Angola proposition come at about the same time? Was it at all related?
A little bit after. A little bit after. But related in the sense that the British authorities were looking for, Herzl especially, was looking for places to establish Jewish colonies. Herzl's plan was a little bit more ambitious because he was looking for a homeland, right? In the Angola plan, the British government was looking to set up a colony. They weren't thinking homeland, anything like that. So Herzl's plan was, he had a bigger vision, clearly, in his mind. And Africa, in general, provided large areas, right? There was plenty of room, which is why during the Second World War, Madagascar plan. Madagascar is an island off of the eastern coast of Africa. And so that's, the Germans looked at that and said, okay, look, there's a place. We'll put them all there. But Africa in general was seen as a place that could handle all of this new immigration. In 1912, the Portuguese passed a bill to begin to give concessions to Jewish settlers. In other words, when Jewish settlers first came to Angola, you can imagine that they were impoverished. What are they going to do? There hadn't been like a large industrial complex set up there yet, so people couldn't work. I mean, what were they going to do? So they were impoverished, and they were looking for ways to make money and establish themselves within the communities. And so the Portuguese then passed a concession, and they could do that because it was a Portuguese colony, right? To allow Jews to work in some of the larger industries, to give them benefits that they hadn't had before. Portugal wanted Jewish immigrants because they wanted to consolidate their hold over Angola. So you can imagine, if you are a Portuguese citizen, and Portugal says, hey, want to go to this new place? We have this new colony in Africa. It's great. How about we get lots of people to go there? nobody goes, right? Jews, on the other hand, Portuguese Jews, it was a different story. And Portuguese crypto Jews, it was a different story. They either needed to get out or wanted to get out. And so the Portuguese government said, okay, look, we have this group of people here who wants to leave. We got a perfect place for you guys. Go to Angola. It's great. Okay? And so the Portuguese wanted to begin to make Angola a hospitable, enticing place for Jews and crypto Jews to go, because the larger the Western population, the larger the Portuguese population of Angola is, the greater hold that the Portuguese government has over the country. Yes, 1912.
So we're talking, first you were talking about immigrants from Portugal in the 16th century,
Right.
which was 300 years, plus 400 years before that.
Correct.
What was happening in between?
Well, we talked a little bit about in the 18th century, we had a functioning, so the 1700s, we have a functioning community in Dando. And then we had,
People, so Jews were, during those 300 years, Jews were slowly,
correct.
Portuguese Jews were slowly moving to Angola.
Yes.
I just wasn't sure, because all of a sudden we're talking about the 20th century.
Yes. Yes. So in other words, it's a good question. So during that period, the late 1800s, 1700s and 1800s, we had a small Jewish population of Angola that was more or less stable. There were no big events that were happening at that time. It existed. And then by 1900s, then we have a new wave coming in, because the Portuguese government tried to make Angola more enticing to Jews. Okay. By 2009, we have a prominent Jewish businessman, shall we say. His name is Arkady Gaidamak, and he becomes a billionaire. And he, along with Pierre Falcone, start arms trafficking. And they are caught, and they're convicted in absentia, because he flees to Israel once he's caught. And because he was such a great philanthropist to Israeli causes, I can't say because of, let it be known that he was a great philanthropist to Israeli causes. And the Court of Appeals in Paris in 2011 overturns his convictions for arms dealing. I don't want to, we don't know that was the reason, but I will just throw it out there. Money talks. By 2012, the Angolan chancellor visits Israel and meets with Shimon Peres, and they were discussing a mutually beneficial liaison between the two countries that had a lot to do with electronics, computers, infrastructures, things like that. They didn't have a full-blown deal that came out of it, but there was the beginnings of that communication. By 2014, Chabad comes to Luanda. Good for them. We have our first Chabad house in Luanda, and Angola has an embassy in Tel Aviv, and Israel has one in Luanda. Part of the cooperation between the two came because Israel helped Angola financially during its war for independence which I had mentioned earlier, was between 61 and 74. So the seeds were set at that time for Israeli and Angolan mutual cooperation. In 2018, Israel allocated over 60 million to invest in Angola, especially in the solar power sector. So the end result is that at the moment, we have a small population, about 300 Jews who are living in Angola, mostly in Luanda, the capital. And they seem to be from all different backgrounds and all different levels of tradition, from Chabad all the way down to Reform Jews, but it's a very small population. And they got there because of the Portuguese conversos in the 15th and 16th centuries. 300. Yes, it is like nothing. But it's there. Yes, Rosa.
So what type of industry does Angola have? Because the Jews for 300 years were involved in some manufacturing or export, import kind of,
So what kind of business does Angola do?
well, even for 300 years, that's what Leonard is asking. What happened during that 300 years? In what industry or which industry were the Jews involved? And I mentioned trade, but I'm not sure what they were involved in.
They were involved in trading earlier, and somewhat later on, but more so earlier. Angola was primarily agricultural, right? There was some mining, and Jews were involved in the agricultural pursuits. And along with that, just sort of smaller businesses, shopkeepers, peddlers, things like that. And they survived that way. Jews don't seem in Angola to have been brought up into government offices or anything like that. We are going to find that in other countries, but we don't find that in Angola. But Angola at the time was primarily agricultural.
Was there a change in the Angolans' attitude to the Jews that were there after their independence?
That's a really good question. The question was there a change in the attitude of the Angolans after they gained their independence? And I don't know the answer to that. I didn't see anything specifically brought up about that. I would expect the answer to be that, any country that has been colonized for a very long time and has had immigration from another country, the indigenous population had to just put up with it because they were a colony. And of course, when we're talking about African countries, it's especially acute because you have blacks and you have Caucasians or light-skinned people. I expect they had to put up with it for that time, but my guess, and I'll research this for you, my guess will be that among the normal population, probably they were less enthusiastic about this. Among the government, slightly more so because they could foster better ties with Israel. And almost everybody wants better ties with Israel because Israel has such an incredible technology sector. Israel is so far ahead of most of the countries of the world that almost everybody wants to do business with Israel.
And
at the time of the slave trading, were there slaves taken from Angola and brought here to the United States or to other countries?
That was getting slaves.
I believe most of the slave trade focused on the eastern coast of Africa, not on the western coast. So like the Ivory Coast and countries near the Ivory Coast, which are on the northeastern side of Africa. That was a prime location for slave traders.
But they came across the Atlantic, so they must have come from the western side as well. I mean, there are places that, I have heard that you can visit now as this is the departure point of where slaves were, sent on boats across the Atlantic.
Yes. Yes. But as I said, my research indicates mostly the eastern coast of Africa. But I'll look that up for you too. I'll look that up for you too. Good questions. Very good questions. Okay. So that's what I have for Angola. Now, it's 10:50, so we can take our break now, and then you can tell me when we get back. Do you want to continue on and we can move into Argentina? Or do you want to do something different for the other half hour, and I can lecture on angels and demons? Okay? So I'll leave that up to you. We'll come back in 10 minutes.
So then the question comes, were the Jews involved in capturing some of these slave men and sending them off?
We get that on the sticker.
I mean, I'm sure there were many, many white people who were involved in that.
I would think so.
So the Joette, participants in the Atlantic slave system included Arabs, Berbers, scores of African ethnic groups, Italians, Portuguese, Spaniards, Dutch, Jews, Germans, Swedes, and Native Americans. If it was a common thing and everyone was doing, just like Jews in the South had slaves, because it wasn't outlawed biblically.
You know, there were slaves in the northern part of the country too. I mean, not as many,
I asked Patrick, yeah, it was 63, now it's 65. He goes around in shirt sleeves. It's always hot. A little bit. I don't know what he does. I'm just wondering if China had gone into Angola, you know, they go into Africa and they help people and they want to. China brought us in. I've only been in other parts of it. Especially agriculture.
Yeah, right?
Do you know Rabbi Daniel Millman?
Yes, Argentinian.
Right, he's done a lot of work in Mexico. He's an old Jewish rabbi, he's done a lot of work.
I met him one time, I think. Seems like a very nice guy.
He knows his stuff. In fact, he did the second one, now he did Spanish.
Oh, very nice.
He does a lot of work in Mexico.
Oh, I'm sure. Yep. Yes, ma'am. Oh, great. Good idea. Very good idea.
so when you finish, you say, we
know when you want to start. Now? Okay. All right, we are back. So first, let me apologize for not being able to stay this full hour, but it's for a very good reason. I teach singing students all during the day, and my student at 12 o'clock now has a callback for a new Broadway musical. They're flying him to New York tomorrow, and so I'm preparing him for his audition for the new, Back to the Future musical based on the movies. So he's very talented, he's very good, and so I'm going to race back and get him ready for the audition. Okay. What would you like to do? You want to continue with Argentina? Yes. Okay, great. I heard a lot of yeses, so I'm just assuming that's mostly everybody. Okay, great. So, Argentina. Argentina is located in very, very southeast South America, just so we have a sense of where it is. All right, as you might expect, the first Jewish immigrants to Argentina came after the 16th century, during the 16th century after the expulsion from Spain and the expulsion then from, subsequently from Portugal, just as we saw in Angola. And by the way, for those of you who weren't here, Joette was absolutely correct. I looked it up over the break, and most of the slaves came from Angola. From Luanda was the port that was known as the place where you got most of your slaves. So kudos to Joette. Great answer. And now I learned something today about Angola, so I love that. You don't realize, you think I come in here and I teach you and you can learn a whole bunch. You don't realize how much I learn from all of you, and that's what makes this so wonderful for me. Okay, so in the 16th century, they came after the expulsion from Spain, especially, and then Portugal. By 1816, we have the first organized Jewish community. It took that long. So they started coming over in the 15 and 1600s, but it isn't until 1816 that there is a large organized Jewish community. By the mid-1800s, Jews from France and Western Europe were fleeing revolutions. So we know that which revolutions? Obviously the French Revolution, right, in 1789. And then later on, we have immigration from Eastern Europe, starting in the late 1800s. Following the assassination of Tsar Alexander II, we have the first big pogroms and riots, and we know those contributed greatly to the aliyot to Israel. Many Russian and Eastern European Jews went to Israel, but they also went to other places. And Argentina was one of the places that they went. By 1860, we have the first Jewish wedding in Buenos Aires. And as well, we have the first minyan, which allows them to begin to build their first synagogue, the Congregación Israelita de la República. So, how is it that we could have a Jewish wedding and then later on we get our first minyan? Do we need a minyan to conduct a Jewish wedding? Good. That's why. We don't need to have a minyan to conduct a Jewish wedding. Two witnesses, correct. And people saying the right words. The man saying the magic formula. Yes, that's right, Janice. The man saying the magic formula in front of two witnesses, and it's a wedding. So, technically, in any Jewish wedding, you know, the ring ceremony comes around the middle of the ceremony, something like that. It comes fairly quickly. It's around the middle of the ceremony, early to middle. Once the groom has said, Harayat Mikudeshet Li, B'tabat Zo, right? They're married. It's done. Then we have the rest of the ceremony where we do the Sheva Brachot and the nice things and all these things. But they're married after he says that magic formula and the ring goes on her finger. Okay. And she places the ring on his finger. It's just it doesn't mean, halachically, it doesn't mean anything. It's a beautiful gesture because we try to be more egalitarian. We want the woman to have something to do, and this is not just the man who is doing this. But that's why it's that, you know, anila dodi v'dodi li. There's nothing about laws or agreeing to anything or anything. It's just a beautiful, beautiful phrase from Song of Songs. Okay. So we get the first minyan in 1860. By the late 1800s, as I mentioned before, we have Jews from Eastern Europe who are fleeing the pogroms of Russia, especially. And when these Eastern European Jews get to Argentina, many of them begin to work as, what do you think? This is going to surprise you. You're going to like this. Yes, Janice, good. You get the gold star. Good job. Very good job. Cowboys. They were gauchos. They were gauchos. Yes, 824 Russian Jews in 1889 fleeing the pogroms become gauchos in Argentina, and they establish a Jewish community named Mosesville. Mosesville, yep. Janice, well done. By 1895, there are about 6,000 Jews, 6,085 to be precise. There was a census taken, and that's the number of people who identified themselves as Jews. They were prohibited from serving in the military or for holding a government post. So what did they do? These 6,000 Jews, they were mostly farmers, peddlers, artisans, shopkeepers, and by 1938, Argentina had severely curtailed immigration. Now, we talked about this in the same way. Did you have a comment? Oh, in the same way that Great Britain and the United States had done, right? 1924 for the United States, 1939 for Great Britain. 1938, Argentina curtails immigration greatly so that Jews can't go to Argentina. By 1946, Juan Perón takes power, and he's actually very favorable to the Jews. And he establishes a sort of a Bill of Jewish Rights. By 1949, he establishes diplomatic ties with Israel. And he's the first to allow Jews to hold office in the government. In 1960, as we all know very well, oh, yes?
I just would like to ask you something.
Sure.
When my grandmother's family came to the United States from old Russia, I'm going to get the mic.
I'll repeat it.
It's kind of long. But anyway,
I'll condense it.
the oldest kid had something, I don't know what, mumps, measles, who knows what. So they would not let them into the United States. Well, they were sent to Argentina.
Mm.
And I'm not sure who, I don't know who it was that established this, farming communities or whatever. And they went there. She learned one word in Spanish all the time she was there, which was until she was 13, it was mantequilla, and that was it. And I always wondered what happened, what came about that when they were turned away at Ellis Island, that's where they went. They went to Rosario. Not.
Good. So a member of the family had a disease of some kind and tried to immigrate with the family to the United States. They were turned away from the United States at Ellis Island, and they ended up going to Argentina, and they were part of an agricultural community in Argentina, right? The oldest girl learned how to ride bareback. Yes, great, great. You know mantequilla is butter. Absolutely. Very good. Okay. Good. Janice says Nazis went to Argentina. Yes.
And Eichmann was arrested in Argentina by the very first Mossad group.
Very good. So Janice is on a roll today. She's 2 for 2 because if you look at my notes here, the very next point I was just about to say before the question was, and Eichmann was living in Buenos Aires, and in 1960 he is caught, kidnapped, and taken out of Argentina. House on Garibaldi Street. There's a wonderful book about that. And Janice says, if you haven't read it, read it. Okay, thank you. That was a great comment. Yes. So we know that Eichmann gets put on trial in Israel, and he is hanged in 1962. What is, what's the word? What is sort of important about that event? It's the only time someone has been executed in Israel. God knows he deserved it. Okay. Starting in 1976 through 1983, there was a military junta that ruled Argentina. This is after Perón. And Jews became the prime target of the military in Argentina during the junta. Any guesses why? After Perón.
I guess would be there's a bunch of Nazis.
Good! The answer is, my guess there was a bunch of Nazis in the military. And the answer is yes. Nazi ideology permeated the military. Great guess. So the military went after Jews. There were over 3,000 Jewish victims, meaning Jews who were detained for political reasons. They made up reasons. And they were making people disappear. Absolutely. You know a lot about this. Very good, Janice. Yes, they were, and people were apprehended. They were sort of tried, but not really. And then they were, as Janice correctly said, disappeared. That's the verb they use.
That they were taken up
I don't know. But somebody who does know?
No, I
Yes?
know, but my question is, it wasn't only Jews who were disappeared.
Correct. Any political opponents to the junta? Yes. And there were yes, and of everyone who was taken as a political prisoner and disappeared, there were 3,000 Jewish victims. Probably the most significant, most well-known, sort of the cause célèbre, was a man named Jacobo Timmerman. Jacobo Timmerman was a journalist in Argentina who was covering the atrocities that were perpetrated by the junta. He was apprehended and taken in as a political prisoner. Eventually, he's released, and he goes to Israel, because Israel had a special arrangement to allow Jews who were taken in as political prisoners to emigrate to Israel. I think this is one thing that Israel does really beautifully. We all know it. Just wherever Jews are in the world, they try to look out for them in a big way. By 1983, we have a return to democracy from the military junta. And the new government began to appoint many Jews to higher governmental positions. Then we have, starting in the 90s, we have sort of an attack. We have attacks on the Israeli embassy is bombed in 1992, and the Jewish Community Center was bombed in 1994. So they couldn't find anyone for the 1992 bombing, but apparently there was a Hezbollah sympathizer who was apprehended for the 1994 Jewish Community Center bombing. Okay. Yes.
I don't remember detail, but I know I read about the fact that in the either late 1800s or early 1900s, there was a whole community of brothels that were taking Jewish girls from Eastern Europe, promising them marriage to Jewish cowboys in Argentina, and taking them there and putting them in brothels. So we had a whole bunch of these brothels, and the brothels made money and were philanthropic to Jewish causes.
Let's look that up,
It was in the book, The Third Door.
because that's very.
Yes, that was it. The third girl. The third daughter. The third daughter, right. Yes, and after I read the book, I did look it up, and I looked on my shelf, and there was one of Mark's books, The Jews of Argentina. I looked it up, and sure enough, it was in there.
The comment from Joette is that at that time as well, there were people who brought in Jewish girls from Eastern Europe as prostitutes to work in a brothel, and then ended up marrying them off to. They brought them in with the promise of marriage to these Jewish gauchos, but they ended up having to work as prostitutes in brothels. So, yes, Jewish men did this. So, Tzvi Migdal was an organized crime group founded in Poland and based mainly in Argentina, that trafficked in Jewish women from Central Europe, mainly from Warsaw, Poland, for sexual slavery and forced prostitution. The organization, whose operators were Jewish, functioned from the 1860s to 1939. The Tzvi Migdal organization reached its peak in the 1920s. There were 430 ruffians, or as we would know them, pimps, who controlled 2,000 brothels with 4,000 women in Argentina alone. The organization's success stemmed from the fact that its members were bound by rules that were based on order, discipline, and honesty. The network was well organized, and members cooperated closely to protect their interests. Let's see what ended up happening to them. Then we have the same organization in Brazil. The first boatload of young Jewish women arrived in Brazil in 1867. In 1872, the imperial Brazilian government extradited some Jewish pimps and prostitutes, but the criminal activities continued. The brothels were concentrated in a few streets near downtown, and the prostitutes came from Poland. They were called Polacas. And this word acquired a scornful meaning in the Brazilian Portuguese language. Wow.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that, Tzvi Migdal was very philanthropic to Jewish organizations. So they made money off the backs of these Jewish girls and then gave money to Jewish charities.
So we had basically an unethical, illicit Jewish organization who was engaging in despicable behavior and then turning around and donating money to Jewish causes. No, that doesn't sound very nice. That doesn't sound very nice at all. You break God's law in order to support God's law.
That probably was just a cover or to try to avoid people coming down on them.
Yeah. So clearly when you make a donation to a philanthropic organization, then you write it off your taxes, right? And I'm sure there was a tax scheme here involved. And because then if the organization ends up doing something good, somehow then you can excuse the bad behavior beforehand if something good comes out of it and you're supporting the community. I think you're absolutely right.
Or they wouldn't believe it. Oh, this organization helps everybody. They can't be charity.
They wouldn't believe it anyway because they gathered these Jewish women from the far. They were able to take these women and tell them, we were able to find something good for you. Yes. Yeah. So the women didn't know where they were going, but they ended up in the brothels. And then the men who were the organizers had all this money and they weren't sure what to do with it. And so if they donate to a Jewish cause, it makes them look better. And I'm sure that it helped their tax situation.
I don't know, well, for sure, the Jewish women were taken with promise of marriage. I mean, that was the ruse to get them to go.
Joette says, for sure, the Jewish women were taken with promise of marriage. That's for sure.
They were poor,
Because they were poor.
so this was an opportunity for them to have a better life.
This was an opportunity for them to have a better life. This sounds, and it seems like most of these women were from Poland. Sure, Janice says that happens all the time with other women as well. Absolutely, absolutely.
But this
right. So this seems strange to us because these were Jewish men who were taking Jewish women, and the men who came to frequent the brothels were often Jewish as well.
So what is the Jewish policy about men utilizing brothels? Is there one?
What do we think?
Is it sinful? I mean, what is?
It's only sinful if she is married.
Good. Now, she said it's only sinful if she is married. Let me point out a beautiful. Oh, jeez. Okay, never enough time. But I can finish with this today. What you just reminded me, what I was teaching yesterday was Tamar and Judah in our Midrash. And so one of the questions that comes up in the Midrash is, how is it that Judah could just see Tamar and engage her services? Do we all know this story, Judah and Tamar? Okay. And so what does the Midrash say? Because the Midrash has to make Judah look better, right? They already love Tamar because she's entitled to the third son Shalach, and Judah's already said, "No, you're not getting him. You were already with two of my sons, and they're dead. So there's no way you're getting the third." And so a wonderful thing about Tamar, she's a strong woman. She takes the matter into her own hands. She says, look, I got my life to lead. I got to do what I got to do. And she pretends. So when Judah sees her on the road, the question is, how could Judah do that? How could Judah debase himself and debase the people? What does the Midrash say? The Midrash says Judah asks her questions first. And one of the questions, are you pure? Meaning, are you in the middle of your menstrual cycle? Because if she were, then it's a forbidden. Are you, perhaps you are a foreigner? And she says, no, I'm a convert. Because we don't know anything about Tamar's background. So presumably Canaanite, because they're in a Canaanite town. And one of the other questions is, are you married? And she says, no, I'm unmarried. Which technically is true, but she's widowed twice, right? Technically, she's unmarried, but she's widowed. And which makes her available to Judah as a permitted liaison. So, Joed is correct. That as long as the prostitute is not a married woman, Judaism, then it's not illegal under Jewish law. It's not savory and it's not ethical, but it's not illegal. In the same way that when in the ancient world, when a man raped a woman, yes, it was horrible. But as long as the woman was not married, it was not illegal. And it is a way that some men got their wives, just like Shechem tried to get Dinah as his wife. If the woman is married, then it's adultery. And the man who rapes the woman who is married, the penalty is death. If the man rapes the woman and she is unmarried, presumably a virgin then it's not adultery, and his penalty under Jewish law is that he must marry her and he cannot divorce her and he must provide for her entire life. And the very sad fact of the matter is, an unmarried woman in the ancient world was one of the most marginalized and vulnerable people in the ancient world. And you had to be very careful. And so if you have already had sexual relations and you're not married, then you were looked at as damaged goods, unfortunately. And you would have a hard time finding a suitor. So the sad fact is that in the ancient world, a woman who was raped as a virgin was often better off marrying her rapist because she would be taken care of for her entire life. She would be protected for her entire life. And she would not be in a vulnerable situation. It's a horrible thought to us in the in the 2022s. It's a horrible thought to us, but that was in fact the case in the ancient world. Yes, I've got to go. I'm sorry I can't stay for the other half hour. We'll finish up Argentina next week and go on to something in the bees. Oh, not next week, in January. Have a wonderful Hanukkah, everyone, and wonderful holidays and New Year and everything. And now we're going to have a short presentation to finish things off with from Susie. You're welcome. You are welcome. Come on. Thank you. Yes, I'm very excited for him. He's very good. He's very talented, and he's excited as well. So, yes, I'll let you know how it goes. Bye.
I think most of you know that I am Austrian. And when the rabbi was talking about Austria, I thought perhaps, especially since we have a little time, you might want to know my story. I wrote the story of the first year of my life in the third person because it's pretty hard to write in the first person. And it was okay. But then my son and I went to a survivors conference, and there was a writing teacher there. And she said, if you write something from somebody else's point of view, it changes everything. So I went back and I wrote my story from my mother's point of view, who was certainly there. And this is how it came out. My mother, Grete, my father, Victor, so you'll know the references. It's Thursday, September 21st, 1939. I am standing aboard the Holland America ship SS Volendam, holding my baby as we are approaching New York Harbor. I see the Statue of Liberty. I soon see nothing. My eyes are filled with tears, which quickly fall, followed immediately by more. I can't hold them back. They are tears of relief, happiness, anticipation. Am I dreaming? Has this long-awaited day finally arrived? Are we truly, finally safe? I have not felt safe for 18 months. In March 1938, the Germans annexed Austria, the Anschluss, and life suddenly changed. When Hitler and his men marched in, the anti-Semitic Austrian bastards welcomed them with open arms. Things had been good until then. I was ecstatic to finally be 3 months pregnant. Victor and I had been married for 6 years, and I desperately wanted a baby, even though I had been advised against it. Since I'd had a kidney removed when I was 15, my doctor thought it would put too much of a strain on my remaining kidney to have a child. But I wanted one so desperately. And just when I was pregnant and so happy, the unthinkable happened. Immediately after the Anschluss, Victor was jailed for being president of the B'nai B'rith. Some of the men were taken to Dachau So the local jail was a better place for him to be. To him, it seemed natural to try to bribe an official. However, he was reported, tried, and sentenced to 4 months of hard labor for the offense. I found out that he was going to be moved from one jail to another and was hoping to get a glimpse of him. His best friend, Oscarson, was coming with me to be my strength. He bawled like a baby when he saw Victor. Some strength. I had to console him. While Victor was in jail, I was able to secure papers to allow us to go to Palestine. We had no intention of going there, but the papers made it possible to leave Austria. We were waiting for our American quota, since that is where we hoped and planned to go. When Victor was released at the end of August, he was told we had exactly 1 week to leave the country. What could we do? I was ready to give birth shortly. Who knew whether my state of mind would make the baby come sooner? What should we do? Where could we go? My uncle and 2 first cousins lived in Zagreb, Yugoslavia. It wasn't that far. At least we would know someone there. It was still safe there, at least for the moment. So that is where Victor and I went with some of our belongings. On September 16th, I gave birth to a healthy girl. I was ecstatic. We were ecstatic. In the midst of our ordeal came a ray of sunshine. I knew I wanted to name her Susie, but we put Suzanne on her birth certificate. She will always be my Susie. Victor and I procured falsified baptismal certificates, but we had to have our Susie baptized. I will always tell her a little water never hurt anyone. By the middle of February, we found out there were warrants for Victor and my arrest, so we naturally had to leave Zagreb quickly. In 2 days, by train and ship, we arrived in Abazia, Italy. Waiting for us there were Victor's mother, Josephine, Victor's brother, Robert, Victor's sister, Mitzi, and her 3.5-year-old son, Louis. Since the apartment was too small for all of us, we found another place to live. We had to move one more time. August 19th, 1939 was a wonderful day. Our American visas arrived. We had booked passage on a ship, the Saturina, which was to leave Trieste on August 27th. Not until we arrived in Trieste on the 24th did we find out the sailing had been canceled because of danger of the war. We went by train to Zurich by way of Milan on August 26th, and we went on to Paris. We needed visas for all the countries we were going through. On September 1st, war was declared. It was the same day we were to leave Boulogne-sur-Mer, France, on the Volendam. When we got there, we found out the ship was no longer scheduled to stop there, but was leaving from Antwerp, Belgium on September 9th. Our only solution was to take a taxi from France to Belgium. In Dunkirk, the 3 of us were interned in a schoolhouse by the French police. It was a dark place with a toilet across the schoolyard. One of the policemen felt sorry for us since I was still nursing and brought us some beer and chocolate bars. We were all badly bitten by mosquitoes, our poor little Susie. We were considered Germans since we naturally had German passports. Fortunately, we also had a letter that finally convinced the authorities that we were not Nazis, but had been thrown out by them. We were allowed to leave after one night, but not until we signed a paper stating we would never return to France. Our journey continued by taxi, actually two, one for us and one for our luggage. When we arrived at the Belgian border, we were told we could not enter without visas. We found an inn in no man's land. The next morning, I left my baby and my husband to return to the Belgian consulate in Dunkirk to obtain the visas. The authorities knew I would return to my baby to nurse her. We finally arrived in Antwerp on September 7th. The room felt like paradise. On September 9th, we boarded the Volendam. Although the crossing was rough, it was safe. And now here I stand. The beauty of the statue and the skyline overwhelm me. We have been through so much, but now we are here. We will soon step onto American soil. We don't know what the future will bring, but I am ready. I'm filled with hope. I'm only 30 years old. I have my husband and I have my baby. This is absolutely the second happiest day of my life. Between the happiest and the second happiest days, there have only been 371 days. We now look forward to many more happy days, years, decades in our new homeland. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them, but that was the story of the first year of my life. Yeah. Yes. Joette said she was glad I wasn't aware of it.
This was in 1939?
I was born in September 38, 6 months after the Anschluss, and then this was a year later. Oh, absolutely. Oh, we absolutely, it is so true. The Americans were very stingy with the visas. We were extremely fortunate. My uncle had left Abbazia and gone to Chicago and was able to get someone to give us affidavits, and I have no idea what the connection was. I found an old address book of my father's, and in very light in pencil it said affidavit giver. It was not a name I recognized, and yes, we were extremely, extremely lucky. And not only that, for those of you who have been to my home, we were lucky in that they took all their stuff. And my uncle was an antique collector. And I have to say, a beautiful home with incredible antiques. And the one thing I so regret is I never asked my mother, where was the lift? That's what the containers were called, because they had handles on the side and they lifted them. And where was the lift the year they were en route? Because the rest of the family was already in Italy. And I don't know the answer to that. So when I get to heaven, which I hope I will, that's one of my first questions to my mother, Janice. Yeah. It was probably, yes, it was definitely courageous, and for my mother to go off to get those last visas, absolutely. But I think because my parents were together that year, it was a pretty special time for them. Now, my father, bless his heart, kept a diary of every ounce of milk that I drank. They weighed me before the nursing and after the nurse. I mean, what else did they have to do, right? But I have the whole story, but in a way, for them to have been able to be together was so incredibly wonderful. Nadia? That's what Nadia asked, how were they able to get their stuff out? And that's the question I don't know the answer to. And most people weren't, they were lucky to get out with, a suitcase at best. I don't know. I don't know. I will say that my family was pretty well off. I mean, we had a liquor company in Linz, and but I don't know that, and I honestly don't know. So thank you for listening, and now you know a little bit more of my history. And, there are as many stories of immigrants as there are immigrants. There are no two stories that are alike. And definitely my family was among the very lucky ones. I will say that my grandmother had 2 sisters who were married to 2 brothers, and the 2 sisters and 2 sons of one of them committed suicide right after the Anschluss. And my mother suspected that the 2 young men were homosexual, and they knew things would not go well for them. And so they actually committed suicide. Now, my mother's father was an ear, nose, and throat specialist in Graz, and he was fairly well known because he treated the opera stars. His office was very close to the opera house, and whatever he did, he made it possible for opera singers to sing. And what many people don't know, but the Nazis required certain doctors to move to Vienna to work in the Jewish hospital there, because there were still Jews there who could only be treated by Jewish doctors, and the Gentiles were not allowed to treat the Jews. So there is a book, the same thing happened in Berlin. There is a book about the Berlin Jewish Hospital. So far as I know, it's only in German, so I have not read it. But it happened both in Vienna and Berlin. Again, something that many people don't know about. And what happened to my grandfather and my grandmother, who were forced to leave Graz and could take nothing with them, they moved to Vienna, or I guess they took some things with them, and sadly, my grandmother died 3 months before the end of the war. She apparently stopped eating, and I know from another relative there was food in the apartment. So I guess things were really bad, And my grandfather, my mother's father, came to the United States in 1946. So, thank you all. Have a wonderful Hanukkah, a Happy New Year. We'll see you the first Wednesday in January. The topic for the writing class is holidays. I will send out an email, and as you in the room know, there was a streaming issue because for some reason the password that has been working all the time didn't work this morning. And so if you saw me looking a little upset, that's why. So we got, thanks to Patrick, got the old password, another password working. I tried to send it to people, and I will send out an email to everyone if you want to see. There's no reason for you want to hear Rabbi Goodman again, but I will be sending out the password so people can see it on streaming. I mean, just when we think everything is going well, there we go. All right, so have a wonderful break, and we'll see you next year.
I have to leave at 1. Okay, that's fine. Verna was looking to stay. Are you staying?